Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Debriefed. My name is Chris Ramsey, and today we're going to be taking a look at a supposed whistleblower, supposed leak from inside the deepest wells of the United States compartmentalized government facilities and military industrial complex. This is possibly a LARP, possibly fake, but obviously we're going to treat it as we treat everything here, with a constant suspension of disbelief and just kind of looking at it without a filter, without a bias, and reading through it and see if there's any connections to be made, because it is a very interesting document indeed, and a lot of you have requested it, so I thought, why not give it a shot? But definitely don't take this as the truth. Allow yourself to be transported, take it at best as fiction, and strap yourselves in, because this is an interesting read-through, and I do look forward to hearing your thoughts about it.
Hi, my name is Brennan, and I'm from Mississippi. This happened back in May of 2016, just outside the city of Corinth when I was 14 years old. My friends and I had been skateboarding outside around 8 p.m. We were about to go back to our house to go to bed. We all live near each other, and they went inside for some water. I decided to stay out near the road. I noticed that what I thought was a bright star, though, on the western horizon. It was unusually bright, so I kept watching it. It started moving towards me, and I was like, okay, it's a plane, because, we get a lot of planes in our area, but before I knew it, got closer, the light got super bright, and before I realized it, this massive diamond-shaped craft was gliding over me, no sound at all, 50 to 100 feet above me, with 4 white lights on each corner. This thing, I'm not even lying, was 1 to 2 football fields long. It was massive, but as it passed over, it was like this super low vibration moving through my head, and I was almost paralyzed. Like, I wanted to reach for my phone and take a picture, but I couldn't do nothing. But at the same time, I felt like calm, like something was reassuring me I'm safe. But after that, it rose towards the east and disappeared in an instant, like just flashed and disappeared. I remember standing there gaslighting myself. I was like, that didn't just happen, but I know what I saw.
Before we get into the video, a quick word from our sponsors. Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is just sitting out there. Not just on social media, I'm talking about sites whose entire business is collecting details like your name, address, your phone number, past locations, even family connections. Then, making that information easy to look up or sell. And what's frustrating is that a lot of this data comes from things you didn't even think twice about, like old accounts or public records, apps you stopped using years ago. And you can try to remove all of this yourself, but it's a mess. Every site has a different process. Some want forms, some want emails, some want ID verification, and even if you do everything right, your information often comes back a few months later. And that's why I use Incogni. See, Incogni handles the data removal process for you. They submit requests on your behalf. They track them. They keep checking over time. If your information shows up again, they go back and take care of it. You don't have to remember which site had what. You don't have to keep redoing the same steps. And you don't have to turn privacy into a second job. If privacy matters to you, this is one of the simplest ways to reduce your digital footprint. You can check it out at incogni.com/area52 and use code area52 to save 60% off your annual plan. Folks, I do want to encourage you to check out itsprobablynothing.com. That is Jesse and I's website where you can buy tickets to the It's Probably Nothing live podcast featuring Jesse Michaels from American Alchemy and myself. We'll be doing 2 shows. At this point, we might even have opened up other shows. So check the website, refresh it, or make sure to follow me on, maybe X or Instagram for more news. It's one of the things that I'm looking forward to the most in 2026, so check that out. Also, if you want to support us, area52.shop. But folks, we paid the bills. Let's get into reading this supposed leak, okay? Now, there's been a bit of a canon event here on this channel, which was early on last year, roughly the same time last year, interestingly enough. I read through what appeared to be some type of whistleblower who came clean on 4chan. Now, obviously, 4chan goes without saying, a lot of A lot of manure over on that site, obviously, but this one sparked some interesting conversations and debates within the UFO realm. And for myself, I think actually created a lot of sort of puzzle pieces that I was able to fit into the phenomenon, namely this idea of like a system that was sent here on Earth to monitor and help life sort of evolve. But a system nonetheless, something that is probably some advanced AI system. Because listen, if I was a super advanced species, billions of years more advanced than anything on Earth, I would probably not be seeding these planets myself. I would have had the technology to bounce around the universe at will, and I would have found 100 trillion exoplanets all capable of primitive life, and instead of living underground in some type of shelter or in some type of protective suit, it would be much easier to preserve life by taking the primitive native species of that planet and inserting my DNA into it somehow genetically, and then monitoring it and sort of giving it all the tools necessary for it to evolve. But I would also probably run a bunch of tests on these planetary petri dishes, if you will. And so for me, that filled a lot of plot holes. Now, I do still reserve skepticism for this theory, and I do still acknowledge that this theory doesn't absolutely... It isn't a all-encompassing theory. It's not a blanket theory that explains everything, but it could explain maybe 40 to 50% of what people have been experiencing, including abductions, including sightings, including even sightings over nuclear facilities or radar facilities, due to the fact that these might just be some type of, autoimmune system response to us detonating nukes, and it's trying to take care of the planet, so therefore it shuts things down. I don't know. All very interesting to me, and I thought, this is good to keep in mind and to see if anything else can fit this sort of hypothesis that we're generating as time goes on. And this read-through, folks, seems to be one of those things. So, like this video, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let's get into it. It starts with a rather aggro title here. It says, "You wanted disclosure. I am a whistleblower, recently, quote-unquote, retired from the inside. And you're only getting part of the truth." This appeared on r/UFOs by Rhea15510. Okay, RHEA. And it starts like this. "Hi. So I heard y'all want disclosure. All right. Hope you have time for this because there's a lot. Grab a coffee or maybe get comfy with a pillow somewhere. I've been watching the news and hearing a lot of things I know to be true, shockingly, being talked about openly by some higher-ups in a documentary, so I figured, what the hell?" Documentary he's referring to is, and I say he, but he or she is referring to, is most likely Age of Disclosure. A lot of government heads talking about disclosure, the militarization of aliens, and yada yada. Also, it is not lost on me, folks, that because I'm reading this, I might actually just be propagating some type of LARP, PSYOP, whatnot. So I do encourage you to actively retain skepticism, or maybe passively for now. But definitely don't take this as the truth. And I do realize that people watching this video and listening to my theories on the phenomenon might also just be extrapolating on what I've already said to further, continue this LARP. That isn't lost on me. This might all just be aimed at this channel, knowing that I might read this. And that isn't lost on me either, okay? So don't take it as the truth. But is what it is. It's entertaining nonetheless, so I gotta read it. I mean, this is interesting. "You can call me Rhea. Not my real name, obviously, but it will do. A little about me. I spent about 8 years in the military to pay for college, and then another decade plus in a part of the U.S. intelligence component that does not officially exist. On paper, I worked for a boring-sounding office in a department most people have never heard of. In reality, it was a compartment inside a compartment, where the odd stuff of a certain nature got routed. My actual specialty is electro-optics. Lasers, sensors, EO imaging systems, the math and hardware behind how we detect things at a distance, and in some cases, put energy on them. Okay, I'm going to just pause right there real quick because I'm going to be referencing the 4chan whistleblower quite a bit. I've done a 3-part series, I believe. You guys can check out. I'll leave the link below to that. But in that, people were asking, where should we look as far as technological advancement goes that would point us to some type of reverse engineering, alien technology? And the answer that this person in the Q&A was given was lasers. And so the first thing we mention here is lasers. Again, is this just playing off that LARP, piggybacking, or, interesting nonetheless that he mentions lasers first. That is what I trained in. What I did most of my serious work on once I was off the deployment treadmill. So when I say I know something about directed energy weapons and weird sensor returns, that's not, I heard this from a friend of a friend. That was my day job. Most of my career was boring in a way dangerous jobs are boring. Long days in windowless rooms. Iraq and Afghanistan in the early years doing the usual mix of SIG-INT and human-INT support. That's signals intelligence and human intelligence support. Phone records, pattern of life workups, building target packets on people who'd never know my name, but might notice a drone overhead letter. After I got out of the uniform, I slid over to contractor work, then got pulled into the permanent government side. Not unusual for a lot of people working in intelligence or signals. Signals obviously dealing with radar. Big companies like Lockheed Martin, etc., all deal with radar. So it would make sense that you would go from that to getting a fatter paycheck, moving into the private sector and then being able to retain all the clearances, etc. For a long time, my world was very normal. Counterterrorism, sanctions invasion, shady cargo going through weird ports, stuff like that. After that, foreign missile tests, and what you've probably seen described publicly as space domain awareness. Basically watching dots move around the sky and trying to decide whose dots they were and what they were doing. The weird part started when I was detailed to a small interagency working group looking at what was called anomalous aerospace and undersea systems. Translation: things detected and showing up on sensors that did not match any known platform, did not behave like clutter, and did not go away when you changed radar modes or swapped optical systems. I was there because I understood both sides of the equation, the physics of the sensors and the intelligence context. You get taught very quickly to treat anything unexplained as a glitch, a calibration issue, operator error, software artifacts, anything that keeps your world tidy. You get used to hearing weird glitch as a catch-all, except after a while you notice some of those glitches kept showing up across different systems, different countries, decades apart. Same behaviors, same basic locations, same signature that never quite fits. At some point, you either admit there is a real pattern, or you drive yourself crazy trying not to see it. If you're useful and you start asking the wrong questions for long enough, someone eventually pulls you aside, takes you to a skiff, takes your phone, has you sign your life away again, and shows you the next layer of the onion. This onion goes deep. I doubt that even after years of briefings, I've been exposed to anything below a few layers. Even still, most of this is purposely kept off NIPR and JWICS and is done in person. Not a huge military buff, so I'm going to look that up. Hey,
let's do it.
Okay. What does this stand for? NIPR and JWICS within military?
Sure. These acronyms come from U.S. military communications and network systems. Here's what they stand for. NIPR. This stands for Non-Classified Internet Protocol Router Network. It's essentially the U.S. Department of Defense's unclassified network used for transmitting sensitive but unclassified information. This stands for Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System. It's the top secret sensitive compartmented information TSCI network used by the U.S. intelligence.
So, okay, interesting. That seems, and he says, even still, most of this is purposely kept off of those. So even kept off of the compartmentalized communications network. That network was probably the network that Matthew Brown, the whistleblower, was looking through when he came across the, unacknowledged special access program known as Immaculate Constellation, which wasn't supposed to be on there. That is where I learned about the most of what you're interested in here and what seems to be bubbling to the surface in the news lately. That when I learned about what we call the Council. Yes, aliens. And I suspect you're not likely to see a lot of what I know mentioned, even by some who know it, who have begun speaking out for reasons I'll get to later. Folks, this is where it gets interesting. As you know, recently we had a whistleblower come on. Sergeant First Class Jeremy Weeks has, graced us with his story and his testimony. And one thing that did stand out to me and also to Linda Moulton Howe years ago was the mention of the Council. Council of Five, he put it, but privately he told me that, it doesn't have to be five. That was the impression that he had because there were five beings in the room at the time. But the Council is also mentioned in channeling material from Raw Contact, I believe. This channeling of the being Ra, the Council was often mentioned as well. So, interesting. I've never met them face to face. Everything I know about them is from briefings, documents, and one secure video session that I honestly wish I had skipped. But it lines up with too many independent data points to just shrug off as somebody's pet theory. The basic story is this. Earth was noticed roughly 2 billion years ago. Long before anything walked around on land. Not because we're special, but because we tripped a sensor. Or rather, life tripped their sensors. You see, the Council is not a single species. It is a collective of several advanced interstellar, maybe even interdimensional civilizations that run long-term surveys of stars and planets, the way we run spy satellites. Huge distributed arrays of instruments working together, watching thousands of star systems at once for millions of years at a time. Their gear probably makes the James Webb telescope look like a kid's backyard telescope. Okay. Also, not unlike what we read about in the alien interview with the Domain, if you remember that. About 2 billion years ago, those instruments picked up biosignatures here, chemical fingerprints in the atmosphere that meant something was alive here. Atmosphere composition like free oxygen and methane, spectral fingerprints, chemical disequilibria that scream there's metabolism happening down there. The basics. At that point, Earth went into a database as interesting. Revisit later. Okay. Kind of, we kind of tripped sensors, I guess, because primitive life was forming. Very interesting. Also, does this feel like AI wrote this? There are some portions of this. It's hard to tell anymore because it's getting really good at, people are getting good at prompting and whatnot, and AI is getting really great, but it's just the way it's perfectly written. Most people can't write perfectly. And so that doesn't take away from the fact that this is real or not real or whatever it is. I hate reading AI. I don't know about you. It kind of irks me. Unless it's unless it's tastefully done. I don't know. But I hate when you can tell it's AI. We'll put it that way. By the way, that last sentence of revisit later reminds me of Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And if you look in the Hitchhiker's Guide, which is this repertoire for the entire universe at your fingertips, it has in large, bold, friendly letters on the cover, "Don't panic." And when you look up Earth, where we live, it simply says, disappointingly to, Arthur Dent, the protagonist of the story, when he reads it and searching for his own planet, it says harmless, and then it was updated later on to say mostly harmless. So it's kind of, reading the interesting revisit later has the same ring to it. Standard procedure for them when a world looks promising is pretty boring from their point of view. They send automated probes. Not big, crude ships like you see in sci-fi movies, just small, tough, very smart machines. Those probes come in, mostly target the oceans, and set up self-replicating facilities on the seafloor. Those facilities use local materials to build more facilities, more probes, craft that can operate underwater, in the air, in near space, and eventually avatars that can interact with whatever life evolves. These biological, or rather biomechanical avatars, are what some people who claim to have been abducted have likely experienced. Though they do have what we would call ASI, these beings are not gods. They are technology, and they aren't perfect. They make mistakes, glitch out, etc. Okay. This is sounding an awful lot like my pet theory based on the original 4chan LARP or leak. So John von Neumann was a scientist who had like early AI concepts and nuclear weapon design, game theory, all of this stuff. And he came up with a concept which I tend to think this might be something we're interacting with, which is the von Neumann probe, which is essentially exactly what is described here and what I've said before, this self-replicating probe that would be launched and landed in, these planets' oceans, and that would use the local minerals and materials to craft whatever it needs for its survival or its mission. And so I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. And then again, this is also something that I've mentioned, where was these avatars, these soulless drones, if you will, that are bioengineered to do a lot of the tasks at hand, such as abductions or whatnot. So again, this is following there's nothing new here so far. We're kind of repeating exactly what the 4chan whistleblower had said, and then what I had sort of added to that, and suspicious, but interesting. The reason they base all of that underwater for a simple reason. The bottom of an ocean does not care about ice ages, political empires, climate swings, or wars. Temperatures and pressures change slowly over what long periods of time. It's a fairly stable environment, and for much of human history has been most inaccessible. Speaking of time, we Earth humans tend to think in terms of nothing longer than the current human lifespan. And when pondering non-human intelligence, we like to think in terms of deep space, distance, and light years, but we seldom consider the lifespan and concept of time for a post-biological species could be quite different than ours. Only our most astute thinkers in the realms of geology, paleontology, and cosmology think in terms of millions or billions of years. Geologic epochs, cosmological history. That is child's play for the Council, which has a different concept of time, more concerned with deep time, millions of years at a stretch. As such, their infrastructure is designed for that. Again, this is reminding me of like The Domain and the Alien interview where, they said they're trillions of years old or whatever. It is an interesting thought, though, to think that, if we invent AI, if we are currently even in the process of making some type of AI, then it's to be assumed in an infinite universe that this AI does exist, the one that we're trying to make. And in fact, whatever comes after that. And, at some point in time, to us at least, in our human perspective, it might look undistinguishable from consciousness, or what we call consciousness. We might not be able to distinguish God from AI at a certain point, and it will long outlive biological life, and maybe that's exactly what had happened multiple times, and maybe this AI had actually come back to complete the circle and start biological life again. Interesting thought. So yes, a lot of TMOs, transmedium objects, and impossible accelerations you've heard about are just their hardware doing its job. Maintenance, observation, sampling, nothing heroic. The warp bubble / Alcubierre effect was probably mastered by them before our solar system even existed. It's old tech for them, kind of like the wheel is for us. Also, no, we are not the center of anyone's universe. There are about 1 billion planets in our galaxy that are more or less like Earth. Some just have microbes. Some have more complex life. A smaller subset of those have or once had civilizations. We are just one more entry, a fairly recent one in cosmological terms, in a very large survey. I can get behind this so far. Once early humans started doing interesting things, we moved from planet with life to planet with potential. All right, so mostly harmless. They have watched this same story unfold in slightly different ways around 1,000 times from what I understand. Chemistry leads to biology, biology creates technology. Tool use, language, agriculture, cities, industry, energy, space travel. Somewhere in there you always hit the same fork. Either the species figures out how to not blow itself to pieces with energy densities it increasingly has access to, such as nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, antimatter, and more exotic matter/energy, or it wipes itself out. Our situation worried them. We are a little paradox, extremely good at cooperation and also extremely good at organized violence. Our aggression stood out. Cooperation plus violence isn't unique, but we are very, very good at both. And once you get to things like nuclear power, that combo tends to end very badly. They'd seen plenty of variations of that play out over at least a few billion years. About 10,000 years ago, our trajectory towards that became clear, and there was a major argument inside the council about what, if anything, to do with us. One side said the odds favored self-destruction once we discovered and weaponized atomic-level energy technologies. The other side argued we were worth saving, or at least worth understanding better. The compromise was an experiment, one which ramifications as to why all of this has been hidden for so long. Roughly 65,000 humans were removed from Earth and relocated to what is basically a preserve on a planet around the star you know as 82 Eridani. Internally, we call those people Erids. That star is in our catalogs, and if you feel like looking it up, but the details of the target planet are not public for obvious reasons. Pause. Right here, folks, because something interesting happened prior to this podcast, about 20 minutes before. I was doing some research, as one does, trying to connect some dots, and I had asked ChatGPT, I was like, hey, have we ever heard of the Erids before? ChatGPT responded with no. The closest thing mentioned in fiction was the Iridians, kind of spelt similarly. And that is taken from a book called Project Hail Mary, which there's an adaptation with Ryan Gosling, made into a movie right now that will be releasing in March. So I thought, what an interesting timing. That's the only sort of UFO lore related piece of information that we found was this movie coming out soon. So is this, some type of guerrilla marketing for that movie? The aliens in that movie apparently are not friendly, and they're not what we're going to be describing here in a second. But something even more interesting happened, folks. I don't know about you, but I'm a big, big believer in synchronicity. That synchronicities, if you choose to, can be quite magical to observe and can have a profound impact on your trajectory in life if you choose to navigate life through, the use of these synchronicities in some way. I have all these books. I have tons of books laying around everywhere, magazines strewn across my office. It's utter chaos and clutter, and I like it that way. But I had recently ordered some books, okay? I had recently ordered this one here. This is, for your eyes only. This is like, it's a spiral-bound, it's almost incoherent. It's just a bunch of information on different alien types, and I thought, maybe there's something in here that people have overlooked. Maybe there's some piece of information that's true, or maybe there's something that might be good material for a read-through here at Area 52. I took this book, folks, It was right there. There's another one there, actually, sitting right there. Another binder. I had not even looked at it yet. I swear on everything that means anything in my life. I picked this up as I'm putting the lights here, I'm putting those lights there, and I open this book. I literally just open it. I don't flick through. I just opened it, and I see this alien head over here. And then on the left side, I see a star map. Have a look. Right there. Right there off to the left of Zeta Reticuli, 82 Eridani. I'll tell you this. I actively, once I saw this, I gasped, first of all. I literally was alone and I said, holy shit. That's crazy. And so I thought to myself, oh, maybe this is like some prevalent lore within ufology. And again, I looked back and see there's nothing to find on this stuff. In fact, I started flipping through this book to see if I could find reference of this planet in this book. None that I could find. And here, a little note underneath says the map was taken from crystal storage device inside a crashed alien ship, which is interesting. We think of Looking Glass or the Yellow Book, etc. Just thought that was interesting. Not saying it's true, but the fact that this planet exists on this star map related to this subject and is nowhere else to be found, I thought might have raised my conviction level by 1%. Okay, I'm not going to go overboard, but the synchronicity isn't lost on me. Knocked my socks off. Just blew me away. Insane. So I wanted to share that with you guys. As I would have looked through all my magazines and my database and everything that I've purchased over the years, and I would not have found anything on that. And then I just opened this random book that I just got, and there it is. The page that I opened. Insane. Sorry for the segue. Thought that was worth mentioning. Alas, 65,000 humans removed from Earth and relocated to this planet as a bit of an experiment. Why, do you ask? Let's find out. The Erids were started in a kind of controlled paradise. Their world has large dispenser systems that can produce whatever basic material needs they have: food, clothing, tools, building materials, entire structures for habitation. Think Star Trek replicators scaled up and wired into the environment. In that setup, nobody starves, nobody is homeless in the way we understand it, nobody spends their life chasing money just to meet needs. This was just the Erids' natural reality. The point from the Council's view was to remove material scarcity from the equation and to see what humans do and achieve when they are not spending most of their energy bashing each other over the head over resources. Meanwhile, the rest of us stayed here on the control planet, dealing with scarcity, ownership, money, hoarding, and the rise of socio-political systems based on scarcity. All of the things that define Earth civilization. Okay, interesting experiment to have like the control group here, to grab a bunch of them and put them over there, but also explain why these beings, and we'll get to, I'll save that for after this here. The result, according to what we were briefed, is that the Erids are now around 5,000 years ahead of us technologically, averaged out. Same species, same basic biology, same starting point, completely different trajectory because of conditions. Nature versus nurture on a cosmic scale. For most of their history, the Erids thought they were native to that world. They only found out the truth roughly a century ago in our time. They learned they were uplifted, that their ancestors were taken from Earth, and that they have cousins here. Once they knew that, some of them started coming back to visit the original branch. This is where their story intersects some of the UFO stories you know. The quote-unquote aliens that look almost exactly human are just that. Human. They are not hybrids, not clones, not secretly angels or demons. They are Erids born around another star showing up here after being given a 10,000-year head start. They have in some cases met with leaders of certain countries and at least 2 UN Secretary Generals, both deceased. Now, this is really interesting because I am fascinated with, these Nordic type, any human-looking alien, because it leaves like a big gap there. Like it's either you through evolutionary convergence evolved exactly like we did, which probably impossible, highly unlikely, or there was some type of DNA relation, genetic modification, experimentation on their behalf that made us. The other option, obviously, is time travelers, right? That they're from some type of distant future or other timeline, that they've come here. That would explain why they look like us. The one thing I never thought about, now, we've thought of breakaway civilizations here on Earth, like the Atlanteans, etc., up in the Antarctic and whatnot, but to raise a different alien or a different type of human on an alien planet is really interesting. And that they would come back and that, because of these replicators, they would all have the same clothes, which is interesting. They would live under the same conditions, so they would all kind of look alike. Very, very fascinating, this story. I didn't fully consider this being an option. And it would also make sense why they are so benevolent and like, hey, loving, gotta help your planet. Peace and love, man. We're bohemian aliens. Of course you are. You were raised in like a perfect enclosure. It's like they went to private school and we got, some inner city public school education. Not saying it's a bad thing. We're from the school of hard knocks down here. But these, they were raised in captivity. So kind of funny, actually. Now we get to why this has been buried for 80 some years. You have to think like a senior U.S. official in the 1940s and 50s. World War II has just ended. The Cold War is starting. Everything is viewed through capitalism versus communism. Then, someone puts a briefing in front of you that says, in essence, there's a group of humans living on another world who have no money, no private ownership in the way we structure it, automatic systems that meet their basic needs, and in that environment, they advanced thousands of years faster than we have. The men who built what we now call the legacy program in the US, that sounded less like interesting anthropological data and more like a walking, talking advertisement for space communism. It looked like the proof that communism works better than the system that they were trying to defend. That, and the ramifications of what could happen if that ever got out, terrified them more than the existence of aliens did. Though, to be fair, they plenty had their worldview rocked by the latter, too. That's so human. That's so human. It's so human that communism would scare the leaders who are trying to protect capitalism slightly more, than the notion of aliens. So human. So the core of the cover-up story has never been aliens or even technologies. It has been the systemic implications. The idea that scarcity and ownership are not hard-coded into reality. That they are one possible way to run a society, and maybe not the optimal one. That was seen as an existential political threat in the 1940s and 50s, and some of the people who grew up in that mindset are still steering parts of the program today. Whoa, we often talk about this. We often talk about how the leaders who know about the program don't want it out because it'll collapse the, stock market, which will start chaos and riots in the street, and the world will be shifted into some type of apocalypse. What if it just destabilizes their idea of what humanity is supposed to be? And that's what they're afraid of, and that's why they don't want it out here. Not because we'll actually all suffer from it, because they will. Whoa, I like that. Now, add in the famous crash retrieval incidents. Roswell 47, Kecksburg 65, a handful of other retrievals around the US and around the world. What we were told is that most of those were not accidents. They were tests and gifts. The Council, with Erid input, allowed certain craft and systems to fall into human hands in a controlled way. Enough intact technology that a very motivated and capable society could learn from it. Not enough that it would instantly rewrite everything. In fact, the Kecksburg landing, it wasn't called a crash internally, was a direct result of a meeting and gift agreement made at Holloman Air Force Base the year prior. The idea was to see who did what with it, who could figure it out, who kept it secret, who tried to share, who tried to weaponize it, and who panicked. Based on those results, the plan was to pick one primary human partner to act as a main interface for full Council contact and to begin a managed process of reunifying Earth humans with the Erids and introducing us to the wider community. Very cool, interesting test. And, we hear about the idea of a lot of these crashes being called donations. Even sites that, are called the giving fields and donation fields and places where things would just land almost as if they were just gifts. You think of another gift, and this was brought up with my podcast with Sergeant First Class Weeks. One of his messages that said, "Return our gifts." Now, instinctively, I didn't just think of the crashed UFOs. I also thought of things like the Yellow Book, things like maybe the crystal mentioned in this spiral-bound book. The looking glass, this type of technology that might have been handed to us. You can argue whether that is a good way to do it. I am just telling you that is the framework I saw laid out. In the 1980s and 90s, during a brief period when the Cold War ended, there was a push to finally disclose much of this. This was initially proposed at meetings between then U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev at a summit in Reykjavik, Iceland in 1986. Also discussed was getting rid of nuclear weapons, as had been urged by the Council. In the end, it was decided to wait. There were two more U.S. pushes for disclosure between then and 2017 New York Times article, one during the Clinton administration and the other during the transition between Obama and the first Trump presidency. Now for the part that put the clock on all this stuff you've been hearing about. 2027, etc. Ooh. First off, this is really interesting because, I think they're going to be talking about some directed energy weapons a little bit later. And Reagan, obviously a large purveyor of the energy weapons, and what was known, I think, unofficially as the Star Wars program was to sort of arm these directed energy weapons, and in hopes of shooting down ICBMs should they make their way across the ocean or whatnot. And something we're probably still working very secretly on. About 3 years ago, a species that is hostile to the Council found out about the Earth Project. They are not part of the collective. They resent the way the Council handles younger civilizations, as they themselves felt victimized by the Council. They also resent the credit the Council gets for successful cases. I have heard them described as the jealous neighbors who would rather break your toys than watch you win. That's interesting. Jealous of whom? Why? What's above the Council? Yes, we sometimes joke about this stuff because, again, it's the only way to stay sane with this everyday knowledge and integrate it into your civilian life of Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas shopping, taking the kids to soccer practice, etc. Just as an inside, ever consider how two of the biggest holidays of the year involve gluttony, Thanksgiving, and overconsumption, Black Friday, when you have the knowledge many have within the program stuff that is taken for granted seems really weird with the symptom of the now forced scarcity of our current system. It's a little conspiratorial, but I dig it. Anyway, back to the aliens. The hostile group I mentioned decided to spoil the experiment. This species is ahead of us technologically, but far behind the Council. Though they also inhabit a relatively nearby star, cosmologically speaking, their travel is slower, less elegant, and has to take place in stages. Think of it as space island hopping, which is why the lead time is so long. Okay. This is also mentioned, interestingly enough, by Charles Hall. He mentions that some of these less advanced species have to hop from planet to get here. So this wouldn't be the first time we hear of such a mode of travel. You probably want to know what they look like. Physically, based on the descriptions we saw, they are about 5 feet tall, segmented bodies, multiple limbs, basically ant-like in overall form, nothing subtle or humanoid about them. Don't like that. You don't hear about these creatures that often, do you? We hear about the mantis, but the ant-like ones we don't really hear about. Is that because they're not here yet? I do know of one case, at least, that features a similar being. In that case, it's not public yet. So that's interesting. Huh. Also, Ender's Game. Ender's Game features bug-like, ant-like insects as well, or Starship Troopers. There's something about bugs that we are also genetically predisposed to just being grossed out by and want to squish. Not saying it's related. They launched an expedition towards Earth with the staged goal of making a mess. Cause chaos here, damage the experiment, and embarrass the council by showing they cannot protect their own project due to internal disagreements. Basically exploiting internal fissures, turning small cracks of understanding in the council into canyons, thus destroying it. That's their hope, at least. The transit time means for us they are only expected to arrive in roughly 2 years from now, or the 2027 holiday present no one asked for. That news triggered a major debate within the council. One group said the rules say non-interference. We watch and record what happens, even if it is ugly, as we have done in the past. The other group said we effectively created this situation by tagging and monitoring this world. We have a moral obligation not just watch a civilization we've been studying get smashed by somebody else's grudge. If the council showed up in force, it would not be much of a fight. Their technology relative to the ant species is like a modern carrier group versus skilled archers on sailboats. The whole thing would be over quickly, and it would also completely blow the point of letting a young species find its own way. It would also be a tremendous blow to the human ego, which the council is well aware of. I could take it. Also, protecting our ego is a wild reason not to save our lives. So they arrived at a compromise. No direct council fleets defending Earth, no obvious intervention. Instead, they would quietly arm us. What they chose to give us are things they roughly call scalar phase weapons. We're talking directed energy weapons here. Our vocabulary is not great here. They're not just high-power lasers. They interact with fields we do not fully understand or fully have names for yet. Shift phases dump huge amounts of energy from the vacuum into very specific volumes of space-time without a conventional bright beam or explosion. Compared to our current directed energy weapons, they are an enormous leap. As someone who spent years working with lasers and optic systems, I can tell you they sit so far off our current tech tree that if you saw the damage assessments from a pulse without context, you would think they were misprints. But compared to council weapons, they are Nerf guns, training wheels per se. Anyway, that decision set off another big argument, both among them and among us. The obvious concern was simple. Once the external threat is gone, what stops us from turning these things on each other the same way we took nuclear power and turned it into thousands of warheads aimed at our own cities? Valid concern on behalf of the council. On the US side, there were people saying exactly that, and some members of the council argued that if we on Earth roll out scalar systems across arsenals, the first real test after the bugs are gone will likely be some crisis where two human governments start lighting each other up with technology they do not fully understand. Nah, we won't do that. Not a chance. The counter-argument, which won, was that species-level survival has to come first. If humanity gets wiped out by someone else's petty feud, then the entire debate is academic. Also, if humans fight this off themselves, instead of watching the council show up and save the day, they will meet the wider community as people who actually did something, not as rescued primitives. Human ego intact. And kill switch, if you will, has been built into the tech to disable it after the conflict which the council sees us winning. If we then decide to use these weapons against each other, they'll simply be disabled until we humans have learned enough to disable the kill switch, which could be thousands of years from now for all I know. Interjection, slight interjection here, folks. This post, by the way, on Reddit has been locked, so nobody can add any more comments to it. And they did that they didn't want to delete it. They even mentioned like deleting it might have just further perpetuated some conspiracy theory that this was true. So instead they locked it because, it's a lot of unfounded, unverifiable, anecdotal text at best. But a lot of the comments seem to say the same thing, and I personally agree. Why not stop these guys, these ant people, from getting here in the first place? And we're none the wiser. We won't know it happened. Blow them out of the water while they're traveling. If this is a LARP, that seems like something you might have overlooked, or maybe you weren't aware of. I don't know. Also, how deep do you have to be into a program to be briefed this profoundly in detail? He's like, oh, just a few layers of the onion. So against a lot of internal resistance, the Council has been quietly providing scalar phase systems to several blocs, not just the U.S. The list I saw included the United States, China, the European Union, through specific channels, Russia and Brazil. Those systems are being integrated into space platforms, aircraft, and undersea assets. Testing is happening in remote places and high altitudes, often disguised as other things. Most of the people physically working on it think it's an advanced, homegrown black program. Only a very small circle in each capital sees the full context. I got to see pieces of that picture shortly before I was pushed into quote-unquote retirement, which is a polite way of saying I stopped being convenient. That is as specific as I am willing to get. There is one more reason I am writing this now, after pondering it for a long time, and it is more personal than the 2-year clock. A friend of mine, someone I worked closely with inside the program, another EO specialist, had been talking quietly years ago about going to Congress. Not with everything. They were not sewer slidal, just enough to force a real closed-door hearing in the Senate, get the true nature of certain special access programs acknowledged on paper, make it harder to bury the whole subject under jokes and career threats. Over a year ago, I got word that they died. The official explanation has been vague and unsatisfying. Medical complications on a trip to a black site in the Indian Ocean. Those medical complications do not match what I know about their health. Then it became an accident at home with no details anyone will put in writing. People who would normally be candid went very quiet very fast. Maybe it was just bad luck. People do die suddenly. But given the threats which are known about within certain IC, intelligence community sectors, when one is associated with the subject, I don't know for sure. What I do know is that the last long conversation I had with them was about whether it was worth trying to talk to certain congressional staffers for a certain senator. After hearing recent news confirming publicly much of what I know to be true privately, I stopped telling myself I would wait and see how things played out. Life is short. So here we are. Some stranger on the internet telling you an unbelievable story you are free not to believe. With roughly 2 years on the clock, and the current rate of leaks and whistleblowers and half disclosures It is very unlikely they keep all of this under wraps until the first time something openly, not from here, appears in our sky or our orbit. At some point before that happens, at least one major government, maybe more, is going to go public in a controlled way. My guess would be China or the US, but it could be one of the others on a scalar weapon list. You will likely get a very careful worded announcement about unidentified aerial phenomena, about contact with non-human intelligence, about new defensive technologies and unprecedented international cooperation. It will be designed to manage panic and control the story. What you probably will not hear in the first round of briefings is the part about the Erids, the economic implications of their society's existence, the billion other habitable planets, the undersea infrastructure that has been here longer than we have had bones. You will not see anyone step up to a podium and say, oh, by the way, there's a branch of humanity that grew up without the idea of money and scarcity 10,000 years ago and advanced 5 millennia past us. That is why I am dumping this here, where people can ignore it, laugh at it, or save it, and see how it ages. Like I said, do not have to believe me. I'm not here to sell a book, go on podcasts, be on TV or do UFO lectures, or / treat this as fiction if it makes you more comfortable. What I'm really trying to do is get you to think past the kiddie pool questions. Are UFOs real? Are the NHI good or evil? Is not the interesting part. The far more interesting questions are what happens to this planet once everyone knows we are being watched, that we have cousins around another star, that some of the basic assumptions we built our societies around were just one option, not a fundamental law of nature. If in a year or two you start hearing officials talk about our cousins among the stars, or civilizations far older than ours, or new non-kinetic systems and shared planetary defense, remember this post and see how well it fits. Look, the bugs are coming either way. The Council is not going to save us directly. They already handed out the tools, and they are watching to see what we do with them. The part that is still up to us is what kind of world we build if we get through it. Will we all go back to work and beat each other over the head with really advanced sticks, or do we achieve a more enlightened potential? That is all I have. Rhea. Woo! Okay. Interesting indeed. Now, I'm going to make some connections here, assuming that this isn't a LARP. Let's just, for the sake of allowing our imaginations to be active. The podcast with Jeremy Weeks talks about warnings. It warns us. It talks about certain technology. It talks about sharing it with mankind. And it talks about getting us ready for an invasion. It talks about a council. It talks about gifts that we have to return. I'm not saying this is real. I'm saying there are an awful lot of points of connection to be made. And although my conviction level on this being true is below 50%, probably even below 30%, I'm not going to completely dismiss it, and I will catalog it. I will stick it, in the filing cabinet with the rest of the information that we've collected and see if we can find any other connections as things unfold. And who knows, maybe by the time that we get some real connecting points, it might not even matter. Because either way, the bugs are on their way, apparently, folks. Man, wild, isn't it? What do you guys make of this? A fun LARP. It doesn't explain a few things. It doesn't explain the humanoid species that are incredibly strong, that have telepathy. But maybe, again, it does. Maybe because they said they were 5,000 years more advanced technologically speaking, maybe they have since interfaced their minds with some type of neural link where, they can now make use of telepathy and more of their brain, essentially. So actually, maybe it does. Would that race be blonde and white? It's a valid question if you look at the work of Madame Blavatsky. And according to her and Theosophy, one of the root races, one of the founding races of beings was the Hyperboreans. The first root race was like the astral race, which is like a non-physical sort of race. And then the second root race would be the Hyperboreans. Often what people actually remembered when they think the first ancient race. And then you'd have Lemurians and then Atlanteans. And then we would be the fifth race, which would be the Aryans, according to Theosophy. Now, obviously, we think about, when we hear Aryan, we think about Hitler and his pursuit. Well, he was a big fan of Theosophy as well, and probably why he went to the North Pole to try and figure out, what was going on there, if there were any Hyperboreans, or, perhaps Atlanteans around. But, if you go back to like the root races, the original races, according to Theosophy, it's well known that they are like these tall blondes or whatever. But that doesn't mean that that's true. If you look at Earth, like the oldest races, in proof that we have here, they're clearly not tall blondes. And so it definitely goes against, any modern take of, our ancestors or what we know about them. I mean, this coupled with the Jeremy Weeks podcast, the star map that I randomly opened up to, makes for an interesting set of, I don't know, it makes it interesting. I'm going to be thinking about this for a few days. I hope you are too. I hope you let this simmer. Let it fester in your little minds. See what comes of it. Maybe you've made some connections. You've probably made some connections after my podcast with Jeremy that I haven't made, that no one's made, and I'm looking forward to reading those. I really, really am. And I look forward to seeing what other connections that the collective hive mind here at Area 52 can come up with. Folks, if you want to join the conversation and keep it going, head over to Discord. We've got threads on Discord. It's like a chat room, but we make threads for like different topics that people can chime in on with their own theories. It's all open to you guys. You guys can do that. Head over there, discord.gg/area52. And also, if you want to support this show further, get some behind the scenes, some extra episodes and all that stuff, and more access on the Discord, head over to our memberships. Join here on YouTube. Click the join button or go to patreon.com/area52investigations and do it there. Lastly, check out area52.shop and it's probably nothing.com if you want to come see us on tour, folks. I appreciate you guys watching, listening, partaking, and communicating with me here today. We'll see you on the next one. Peace and love.